They bulldozed my sister's lifeline at 6 in the morning while she was still dreaming, and then the bastards had the nerve to hand her a bill for the service. But what they didn't know, what none of those suburban dictators could have guessed in a million years, is that the quiet woman they just trapped inside her own home is the same person who signs the checks that keep their entire operation breathing. My name's Jax, and if you've ever dealt with a homeowners association, you know they're basically just failed prom kings and retired hall monitors looking for a reason to feel important. But our HOA president, a piece of work named Sterling Vance, took it to a level that's going to go down in the history books of, finding out. You see, about 2 years ago, the universe decided to test my family's breaking point, taking our folks in a pile-up on the interstate and leaving me and my sister, Elena, with 2 side-by-side cottages in a sleepy little patch of South Carolina called Willow Creek. Elena's always been the brains, the kind of person who reads federal tax codes for fun while I'm out here swinging a framing hammer and getting sawdust in my coffee. And she's always been super low-key about her work, just saying she handled, policy and appropriations, while taking these intense, closed-door calls that sounded like a foreign language. Then, 14 months ago, a distracted teenager in a lifted truck blew a red light and changed Elena's world forever. And after months of surgeries and rehab, she came home in a chair, facing a world that wasn't and oppos built for her anymore. I spent 3 weeks of my life building the most over-engineered, beautiful mahogany ramp you've ever seen, making sure the rise over run was perfect and the grip tape was industrial grade because I wanted her to feel like she hadn't and oppos lost an ounce of her independence. And let me tell you, seeing her roll up that incline for the first time with the sun hitting her face was the only time I've cried since the funeral. I did everything by the book, got the city permits signed, sealed, and delivered, and I figured the HOA would just be glad the property value was staying up, but I hadn't and oppos. T accounted for Sterling Vance, a man who wears white loafers without socks and drives a Tesla he can't park, a guy who literally walks the neighborhood with a ruler to measure the height of people's fescue. Sterling had been nursing a grudge ever since I told him to get off my lawn 3 months prior, and he decided this ramp was his moment to shine, claiming we'd bypass the Architectural Review Committee, which, as it turns out, is just him and his 2 golf buddies drinking gin at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. I woke up to the sound of a diesel engine idling in the driveway and the horrific screech of metal on wood. And by the time I got outside, half of my mahogany masterpiece was splintered scrap metal while Sterling stood there smirking, holding a clipboard like he was a general conquering a small village. Elena was at the window, her face pale, watching the only way she could get out of the house being ripped away by a bobcat. And when Sterling handed me a, notice of violation and removal fee, for $2,500, I nearly lost my mind, but Elena just caught my eye and gave me this tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. She didn't in oppos, T scream. She didn't in oppos, T cry in front of him. She just sat there in her chair, watching him like he was a bug under a microscope. And then she went back in her office and the door clicked shut. For the next week, it was a war of attrition, with Sterling sending, security patrols, to sit outside our house and issuing daily fines of $500 for the, debris, he'd created, and every time I tried to argue, he'd just point at his little rulebook and say, compliance ISN and oppos, T optional, Jax, we have standards to maintain, with that nasal, condescending whine that makes you want to vibrate out of your skin. What I didn't in oppos, T realized was that behind that office door, my, boring, sister was in oppos, T just filing a grievance or calling a lawyer. She was making calls to the state capitol and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, speaking with the kind of authority that makes generals stand up straight. I've been doing some digging of my own, because 20 years in construction teaches you that the guys who talk the loudest about rules are usually the ones breaking the biggest ones. And I found out Sterling had been funneling every HOA landscaping and repair contract to his brother-in-law's firm for triple the market rate. We're talking $80,000 for, drainage improvements, that consisted of a few bags of gravel and a plastic pipe. And when I showed Elena the records I'd scavenged from the county clerk's office, she just smiled, this cold, sharp smile that I hadn't seen since she was valedictorian, and said, that's the cherry on top, Jax, but the sundae is much bigger than you think. End quote. She told me to get her to the town hall for the monthly HOA meeting. And let me tell you, the atmosphere in that community center was thick with the smell of stale coffee and impending doom, as Sterling sat up there on the stage like he was the King of England, ready to announce a new, end quote, special assessment, end quote. That was basically a way to tax the neighbors into paying for his brother-in-law's new boat. He started the meeting by trying to publicly shame us, putting a photo of our, end quote, illegal structure, end quote, on the big screen and talking about how, end quote, certain residents, end quote, feel they're above the community standards, and the way he looked at Elena, with this pitying, smug condescension, made the air in the room feel like it was about to catch fire. I stood up and laid out the fraud I'd found, the kickbacks, the brother-in-law, the inflated invoices for the, end quote, fountain repair, end quote, that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and for a second, the neighbors started murmuring, but Sterling just laughed it off, saying I was a, end quote, disgruntled laborer, end quote, who didn't in oppose to understand how high-end management worked. He thought he had it won. He thought his buddies on the board would just vote to increase our fines and put a lien on our house. But that's when Elena rolled herself up to the microphone, and the silence that hit that room was so heavy you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. She didn't end oppose, lead with her title. She just started asking questions, quiet, surgical questions about the, end quote, Willow Creek Development grant, end quote. The HOA had accepted from the state last year a grant for $300,000 meant for, end quote, infrastructure and accessibility, end quote. Sterling started sweating, his face turning a shade of purple that matched his polo shirt, as he tried to bluster about how that was, end quote, private board business, end quote. But Elena just pulled a stack of documents out of her lap and said, end quote, actually, Sterling, when you accept state taxpayer money, you're bound by the Fair Housing Act and the State Disability Access Mandate, and by destroying a permitted ADA ramp, you've not only committed a felony civil rights violation, you've defaulted on the entire grant, end quote. Sterling sneered at her, asking her who she thought she was to lecture him on state law. And that's when she finally dropped the mask, looking him dead in the eye and saying, and, quote, I'm Elena Vance Montgomery, the state comptroller and the chairperson of the Budget Oversight Committee. And as of 5 minutes ago, your funding has been frozen, a forensic audit has been triggered, and the state police are waiting in the parking lot to discuss that $80,000 drainage contract, end quote. The look on his face was like he'd just swallowed a live grenade. His jaw literally dropped, the clipboard slipped out of his hand and clattered on the floor, and the room erupted into a level of chaos I've only ever seen in movies as the neighbors realized they'd been getting fleeced by a guy who just picked a fight with the woman who controls the state's checkbook. It wasn't an oppose, just about our ramp anymore. It was about the fact that this guy had built a little kingdom on a foundation of theft and bullying, and he'd been so arrogant that he never bothered to check the professional background of the woman he was trying to ruin. Watching the state troopers lead him out in handcuffs while he was still trying to complain about, end quote, unauthorized signage, end quote, in the lobby was the most satisfying thing I've ever witnessed. And within 48 hours, the board was dissolved, the fines were wiped, and a crew was at our house rebuilding the ramp. This time with heated tiles and a glass railing, all on the HOA's dime. Elena is back to her, end quote, boring, end quote, policy work now, but the neighborhood is a lot quieter, and the new board treats her like she's a visiting dignitary, which she basically is, but it makes you wonder, how many people are out there right now getting their lives made miserable by some petty tyrant with a clipboard because they don't have a brother who knows construction or a job that gives them power to strike back? Was it right for Elena to use her, end quote, nuclear option, end quote, to settle a neighborhood grudge, or is that just the way the world works when the system is rigged against the little guy? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, because honestly, I'm still trying to figure out if we're the heroes of this story or just the people who had the biggest gun in a knife fight. Either way, I'm just glad I get to see my sister roll into her own front door without asking anyone for permission. Don and Oppos, don't forget to like and subscribe if you think Sterling got exactly what he deserved, and tell me, what would you do if someone tore down your only way home?